Welcome to Ethical Algorithm. My name is Joe. This is Gavin and Ilio. Today we're going to be talking about Microsoft Recall, Rabbit R1, and Humane Pin. Microsoft Recall. What are you guys' thoughts on that?
I think the reckoning is here. There's been, I don't know, 30 some year history of Microsoft doing really stupid security stuff. And for some reason, everyone's basically just ignored that. And it's still used in government and everywhere else. And I have said, I will say it now on the record, I have said anyone who sold Microsoft software to any branch of the U.S. military or government should probably be facing treason charges. I'm not saying we have to go for the death penalty, but you have undermined the security of the country. And it's finally caught up with them, right? Like people are sick and tired of stuff breaking and just getting hacked into all the time. And it took the trend and the hype of AI to really highlight this in a way that people can't deny.
Well, let's get everybody on the same page first. As far as Microsoft Recall, what is that and what are the concerns? So Microsoft Recall is this ingenious idea to take periodic screenshots of your screen and then store that somewhere in a database local on your computer or possibly up in the cloud. I'm not quite sure on that. And then you can ask it, hey, I was supposed to send somebody an email the other week. Who was that? And so it looks through those pictures and it finds that information and then it returns and it says, oh, you were supposed to send so-and-so an email.
Did it store the screenshots or just the AI processing of them?
I'm not sure on the entire details, but the fact is that there is information. You're taking periodic screenshots
probably
of your
a few
screen.
months worth, depending on disk size.
Right.
Yeah.
Which is ridiculous because I do penetration testing. I deal with a lot of client vulnerability information. And so for a system to take periodic screenshots of me doing that, the first thing, honestly, when I first heard about it, the first thing that came to my mind is everybody trying to use incognito tab to watch Pornhub.
yeah. And the new lawsuit where Google finally had to admit, I believe it was in Europe where they sued them. And they're like, incognito doesn't actually protect you from anything. It
and in the U.S. too. Yeah.
Oh, was it also? Okay, I couldn't remember. We also got them there. But so, yeah, incognito, sure, it keeps it out of your local history, but it doesn't stop any of the data collection, right? Everyone still knows what you're doing who's not on your computer. But yeah, that's the thing with Recall. So from my understanding, it takes these screenshots. I don't know if it keeps the screenshot. I think it was supposed to be processing these with AI, basically OCR, but a little better than, traditional OCR, and then storing what it saw. And the biggest problem was there was no censorship. So on Mac OS, and I'm guessing Linux too, I'm guessing not Windows, there is a special type of field. When you accept password input, you use a special UI widget that blocks off the ability to capture what's in it and blocks off sometimes pasting. Like it has all these restrictions to make it a lot harder to swipe someone's password or they're typing it in, right? Like it grabs keyboard focus and nothing else can kind of listen in while it has focus. They weren't doing that. They weren't taking any kind of precautions. They weren't like, as you're typing it in, a lot of the password things, right? For a split second, they'll show you that character and then they'll hide it. And anything sensitive on screen was not being redacted. And again, we do this in logs, like in actual web applications, we have certain fields that are just never logged. Or you can do tokenization. There's ways to keep the data safe so you can still do analysis. And they didn't do any of this. And so, yeah, for potentially 3 to 6 months, you just have this entire searchable trail pre-collected. Now, it didn't currently go to the cloud. That was one thing Microsoft clarified. Right. It stayed all local. But that matters a lot less than it seems like. Because as people pointed out, there's a whole bunch of existing data on your machine that it's sensitive. And a lot of malware has found ways to get in there and then exfil that. So Microsoft basically handing any malware author, here's everything you wanted with a bow around it.
And they're already doing that. Researchers have already come up with ways to basically pull that information out of the system itself too. The thing is, like, in a more broader conversation, it's companies trying to use our data to train or teach AI in some way, shape, or form without our consent. We're seeing this now with Adobe. Adobe's Creative Cloud is now, in their terms of service, allowed Adobe to pull your pictures from Creative Cloud, your private Creative Cloud, in order to train their image generation system. They've recently clarified some of the conversations around that, but a whole bunch of people were terrified. They're like, why are you taking my images? I did not consent to this. It's like, well, if you read the terms of service, you actually did. And it's becoming harder and harder to use some of these cloud services, which are great. Like the cloud services are fantastic. They make things so much easier for people. Well, they make things usable for people. People use them for a reason, right? And that's the only argument that I have there. So if you're building a system that people are using and people want to use and they have an understanding of how that system works, now you're taking that information out, like that's kind of a violation of trust. Now there's there's certain situations where it's a little harder for people to push back. For example, Facebook has been talking about using Facebook information or Facebook posts, Facebook photos, and Instagram from 2007 to train their next iteration of AI. It's already on Facebook's platform. In the terms of service, it says anything you post on here now belongs to Facebook. And so you can't really do anything about that. But when you're paying for a service, then that kind of changes the conversation. On top of that, we're seeing more of these systems putting AI in, right?
Yeah.
Apple was talking about introducing ChatGPT to Siri. So they did something a little different than Microsoft, because when Microsoft made that announcement, they were just panned universally. For Apple, it's a little different. They're trying to clarify and kind of catch some of those questions ahead of time. And so they say, hey, look, everything's handled by Siri. Everything's handled on your device. You have the option to opt in and give Siri permission per question if you want to pass that off to ChatGPT and kind of increase the ability for Siri to respond with an accurate better information.
Mm-hmm.
I got to hold back on accurate because we know what hallucinations can do.
Yeah.
That's much better. That is a much better way to deliver that information. But Microsoft, not so much. Adobe, not so much. But we're going to see this. We're going to see this, especially for all the major players, because I'm waiting for Sony to announce what they're actually doing, or they might try to fly under the wire as everybody else is getting hit with this news. It's just like breach reports, right? One company says, hey, we've been breached. It's like, all right, cool. We don't have to tell people we've been breached too.
Yeah, it's the old saying in cybersecurity, there's two types of companies, those that know they've been breached and those that don't.
What are your thoughts, Joe?
Well, I wanted to ask you guys a question. For Microsoft Recall, what are the pros and cons? What do you guys see? Like, it can be commercial or just residential.
The concept is good, right? The concept of being able to ask your computer to augment your brain and just say, with, again, the flexibility, because crafting good queries is really hard, especially for non-programmers. And so being able to just put in English language, like, hey, what was the thing I did about a month or two ago? Who was I talking to right before this? But that's really cool. The problem is not that the computer knows what you're doing. The problem is what other computers and thus other people know. And again, if we hadn't gone down the cloud route, like I remember early in my career seeing Microsoft propose the cloud, and they're like, oh yeah, it's going to be great. You know, all the software, everything will be on our servers. And then whatever computer, you just get onto it, right? And all your stuff is right there. And again, this is how computers used to work back with mainframes. You had a dumb terminal, and there's one big computer that everyone shared. So that's how it started. And then we got the personal computer. But the difference was the mainframes, it wasn't personal stuff, right? It was for a business or a school. Right. So you had no expectation of privacy. It was just the papers and the research and stuff you're working on.
Right.
But with a personal computer, now it's personal. Right now, you have your stuff that is deeply private, and you don't want other people having that. And because we've had this oscillation from mainframes to personal back to the cloud again, now it's like, well, wait a minute, who has access to that? And that was what, like I said, when Microsoft first pitched the cloud, they're like, we'll have all your stuff. It'll be the newest software when you log in. And back then, people were like, well, wait a minute, but if I don't pay you, then what? And they're like, well, and it's like, yeah, so you're going to hold my data hostage,
right.
So I have to pay you. Yeah, no thanks. And the cloud was roundly rejected about 30 years ago when they first pitched it. People like, oh, hell no. I do not trust Microsoft. Like, no, you hold people hostage all the time at the business level. We're not going to do that with their personal stuff. And then about 10 years later or so, the cloud was the hottest thing and software as a service. And now pretty much everything is in the cloud, which is horrific because it adds all of this extra, like your attack surface explodes when you put stuff in the cloud. Instead of just your machine and whoever can get to that one machine, now it's any one of these machines, probably thousands, tens, hundreds of thousands of machines in these clusters that have access to your data that's duplicated and which is the good thing, it's duplicated for availability and resiliency. But the bad thing is now it's all over the place. It's so much easier to find all your data. And it's not just my data, it's your data and your data. And it's everyone's data. So once you breach one of these clouds, you have everyone's stuff. So that's the downside is, I love the ability to go back in time and quickly and easily just, outsource some of my memory. That'd be amazing. but I really don't want Microsoft or Dropbox or Apple or anyone else to have that data.
Yeah, some of the architecture for these systems, because I've dug into it, are actually pretty decent. The way that they're set up, the way that they segment everything out, is the tenant separation is really solid. So I'm not too concerned there. And you can make an argument that it's easier to secure everything in one location where you put all of your effort and energy into securing it instead of separating it out.
Theoretically, yes.
Right.
Theoretically.
Honestly, what I would add to that is that there's always a sliding scale between usability and security, and that's something that we need to work with. So when it comes to businesses, their motivation is to increase usability. When it comes to security, we naturally have to decrease that usability to improve security. And so that's kind of the sliding scale that we're dealing with. In terms of the cloud and uploading some of this stuff up, like why would somebody want to use Microsoft Recall? I can see, a lot of friends and family like really enjoying that usability. It just comes with the security downsides, and we need to be honest and upfront about that.
Right.
There's also this whole idea of, the system is doing something that I don't know and I don't understand, and because of that, I'm scared. And so we also need to kind of bring that into the conversation.
Yeah. So, I mean, oops, let me turn that level back up. So I think, again, the concept is solid. It's the implementation is the problem.
Yeah.
That's the short answer.
What about corporate?
Terrible idea.
Same things. Like if your business secrets are out there, that's a liability. Like,
Okay, let's just say like a nonprofit. Somebody that doesn't
if
have
you
top
have any
secret.
kind of information that's vaguely
PII,
right,
anything, PCI data.
HIPAA,
that it's sketchy.
Whatever.
Yeah. Now, someday into computer science fantasy land, there's cool stuff like FHE or fully homomorphic encryption. And so homomorphic meaning same form. And this is mind blowing. When I first read about FHE, I'm like, there's no way. That doesn't make any sense.
Didn't I tell you about homomorphic encryption?
No, we talked about it.
Yeah,
it was
we
awesome.
did talk about it.
But I've been watching this, and like when it came out, the hit you take, I think it was 9 orders of magnitude, is like the performance hit you take to do full FHE in the original paper. And they've done a lot of work, and they've brought it down to like 2 to 3 orders of magnitude, which is still, it's not great, but 2 to 3 orders of magnitude is like, okay. I mean, that's a penalty.
It's a little bit more.
But,
Easier
for the advantages, it's not bad. So FHE allows you to take data and allows you to encrypt that data, send it off to the cloud, let them process the data on your behalf without decrypting it, and then allows you to take that back and then decrypt it and have the process data, which is just insane. Normally, if you modify encrypted data and you decrypt it, it's just garbage. Like there's just nothing there you can use. So anyway, this is a real thing. Again, if we can get it down to within 1 to 2 orders of magnitude, viable. I mean, 10 times more compute if you had 1 order of magnitude, but that's pretty good. Knowing that they won't be able to see. Now there are caveats. It's not they won't be able to see any of the data. It does leak a little bit of data, right? If you sort stuff, you can kind of infer first and last and all this. But it's pretty good. So there's been, in computer science circles, there's been a lot of talk about FHE and what that could mean for cloud computing, because suddenly a lot of the drawbacks of the cloud are people have to have your data unencrypted to process it. That's not true anymore.
Right.
So
the way they
someday.
encrypt your data is actually pretty good right now with how it is, because you have encrypted on disk in the cloud. Sometimes you got to turn that on, but encrypted on disk in the cloud, so encryption at rest. But they also have a setup where you can set up a key, or there's a key associated with your account, and so it encrypts the information in that key, and then when you access it, it decrypts the information with that key. They never have access to that key, and then you can even set it up so that you have a separate key that you own on your own infrastructure that it has to make a call out to decrypt.
So if we're talking just dumb storage of files, then you can pre-encrypt that and store it, and there's a lot of advantages to the cloud if you're using strong encryption like AES 256 or better. That's great. Most people aren't doing that. If you're letting them generate the keys for you, you really don't have any meaningful protection. I mean, it's better than nothing. You're not wrong about that, but it's not that hard. A lot of these, what was the headline I literally just saw today? Of like 43 people got phished at some org, and so now they don't know how many 100,000 people's data is affected. And this is the thing. I remember articles came out back when I worked at Amazon about a decade ago. Oh, did you know they can see your data? And all of us anyone who's ever built websites is like, yeah, how does the public not know this? Like, how do you think when you call me because stuff isn't working and I get in there and fix it? Like, the administrator has to have access to the data unless you are pre-encrypting before you send it, which no normal person is doing. Like, yeah, of course I have access to everything. I have to keep the system running. I have to have full database access to do maintenance and add features. And I couldn't do my job if I didn't have access to everything. And it was just crazy watching about a decade ago, people have this realization, oh my God, this small group of people has access to everything. It's like, yeah. That's why we don't like the cloud.
Cloud is someone else's server. I do love the cloud, though. I absolutely love the cloud. What's our next topic, Joe?
Rabbit R1.
Do you want to start with Rabit or Humane? They're both in the same category.
They're both in the same category, but we got to start bring everybody into the same page. What is Rabit R1?
Rabit R1
is
is a gadget. I think it's like an attachment to a phone. You can use AI on Rabit R1. Is that correct?
So it is a separate device instead of your phone.
No,
their argument was that you could not run this on a phone. They had some fancy proprietary software.
You're getting ahead of
or
yourself.
Hardware. Anyway.
Talk about what it is.
So it's a little orange, like bright, like eye-piercing orange. This little square that has a screen. The screen doesn't do a whole lot, but it does have a screen. It has a weird, creepy camera, which is kind of a cool idea. So like it can point forward or backward. It like swivels in the thing. It has like only like 2 or 3 buttons, one main one. And so you pull this thing out of your pocket and you press the button and then you ask it questions and you ask it, hey, get me an Uber to this location. Hey, just kind of like Siri, but more so. Like you ask it to do tasks, and it's supposed to be able to do tasks with a pure voice interface. There's no keyboard. You have to talk to this thing to get it to do stuff.
Yeah, it was basically Siri as a device using ChatGPT or some large language model on the back end. It was supposed to get access to other apps, right? Uber, Lyft, you name it. DoorDash.
Yep.
All the food delivery apps were going to be on there. You could also point it at a building, or you can point it at something and say, hey, what am I looking at? It'll take a picture, it'll analyze that picture, and it'll tell you exactly what it sees. So it's pretty useful.
Fun seeing science fiction. That is one of the plot points. There's a anime called Eden of the East, and that is one of the main plot points of that anime.
That was a pretty good
service,
one. Yeah.
Right?
Eden of the...
Very prescient in some ways.
It was weird that they did the 2 movies at the end, or they did the movie as the second season, essentially. But yeah. So Rabit and Humane Pin were basically the same thing. They worked very similarly. The thing is, they were in an unreleasable state, and they released it anyways. And so across the board, all of the tech reviewers panned these devices because they didn't work half the time. You also had to pay for a separate phone subscription. So instead of using your smartphone like Siri does, you have a specialized device that does less than a smartphone and only has access to essentially ChatGPT and a multimodal model. From there, half the functions don't work. It would not work itself, like through the LLM consistently. It was causing issues. Sorry, I keep hearing myself, and it's like hard to talk and think at the same time. We have my volume cranked a little
too high. Can turn your volume down a little bit for you. Volume. The interesting thing was both of these things didn't work in interesting ways. So the claims for the Rabit were that it was full AI doing the stuff with these autonomous agents and whatnot. And it wasn't. It was basically they were doing screen scraping, and I can't remember if they were using Puppeteer. It was one of these browser automation tools we used.
Yeah, it was like a
testing.
browser automation tool. So if you told it to go to Spotify, it wouldn't actually use like a Spotify API. It would use the screen scraper. So that means if they changed the UI at any point,
it would break.
Then it would break.
And they'd have to redo it, and they weren't on that fast enough, so it would break. And then you would see, like, this is not available right now, like most of the time. It couldn't even do what it would claim to do. And Humane was totally different. Now, Humane was 2 ex-Apple employees, so everyone had really high hopes. And apparently the build quality was really good. I think it was like, $700-800 for the Humane?
Yeah.
And it was a pin, so it had a magnetic back.
Yeah, so you just pinned it on your lapel.
It would stick to your shirt. And the idea was this was, I don't remember if they're calling it spatial computing. I guess it's a new term for ambient computing. And it had a laser projector, and it's had some neat tricks. And so you'd tap this thing. You could do a few finger gestures on the flat part, and it had a little camera and had a little projector. And so, again, you could ask it, but the problem was when you asked it, and they actually showed this, it would take 5 to 10 seconds.
Yeah, I saw that.
It's actually, the idea is, you can just tap
slower.
this thing, right, and ask a question, you're done. No. You can tap this thing, take your phone out, look up, get the answer, put your phone away, and then it's giving you the answer after you've already put the phone away. So people are like, wait, why do I need this? I can just do this on my phone right away. This isn't saving me any time. Not to mention it would overheat. And there's also the battery case got recalled because that could catch on fire. That's the last thing to happen.
I love when things catch on fire. No. There's so many of these stupid little bullshit products that every single time they catch on fire, I'm like, yes. Vape pens, the stupid little hoverboard, because people would ride those all over the place. They kicked them out of university because people would ride them around university. It's like, dude, just get a longboard or walk or a bike or something normal. Like I saw this dude, like he was on the hoverboard. His friends didn't have a hoverboard, and so it's this pack of people and like one dude on a throne, basically just gliding by, and it's like walking's for peasants. So when that thing catches on fire, I'm just like, yes.
Yeah, right? Just all these products, Teslas, SpaceX
it's
rockets.
The batteries.
Like...
It's the type of batteries they have. That's why they don't let you fly with them.
Yeah. There's certain things. I remember the old Samsung was the Galaxy S7 or Note 7.
Galaxy Note.
And...
The Galaxy... all right.
Did you ever see the game mod?
Yeah. The Grand Theft Auto 5 game mod where it was a Galaxy Note that you would throw as a sticky bomb. It was hilarious.
It was great. But yeah, and that one, they had not, when they manufacture the battery, there's these little sheets of electrolyte and plates and stuff. They hadn't gone around far enough. So a thing with lithium-ion batteries is they all bulge eventually. They generate hydrogen gas. They're fully sealed. So this is why over time, especially if you keep them charged all the time, they inflate like a balloon. And so what would happen is when this thing started inflating, it would change the shape of the battery from this very thin flat thing, and it would start pulling the sides in. And then the sides, because there wasn't enough insulation on the Note 7, it would touch. Two parts would short out internally, and that's why it would catch on fire. That's what happened. And it was just such a stupid little thing that became such a major problem. Because people don't remember, the airlines, when they tried to get laptops on planes, it took a long time for the FAA to be like, yeah, no, lithium's super flammable. That's not going anywhere near an airplane. And they finally, enough lobbying, they're like, no, like it's safe now. And it's a lot better than it used to be. Like lithium batteries don't fail too often these days.
I just want to ask you guys, if you guys had to choose, which one would you pick? R1, Rabit R1, or Humane?
Well, the Rabit R1 costs less, so
it's $200.
I would have wasted a lot less money.
And then I think Humane was like $700 and $24 a month.
Yeah, and I think the Rabit, I don't think the battery life, because the Humane had really terrible battery life. It was like 4 hours tops. And I think the Rabit, I think, was slightly better. So I would go with the Rabit, even though they're both deeply flawed products.
It has an option to use a touchscreen, but you couldn't use it all the time.
Did they even enable that?
Yeah.
Okay. How about you, Gavin? Which one did you go for?
Honestly, I don't know enough about either of the products to say which one's the least worst. I just know that I'd rather use my smartphone. I don't need to buy another phone subscription. I don't need to deal with... All right, here's the thing. Rabit R1 is an Android app that's ran on this hardware, but for whatever reason, they said, oh, well, it can't actually run on Android. Then somebody modded it to run on Android, and they're like...
Yeah, and they're like, oh, I guess it can. Yeah. But that's...
what would you need to see for... Well, like, if Humane, right, or Rabit R1, what would you need to see for the company to do better for you to buy or something like that?
Well, unlike the venture capitalists, because right now they're seeking $1 billion, and who knows, they may get it. But... Again, this is after everyone's seen it horribly fail, after Marcus Brownlee and like every other tech reviewer. But Marcus specifically, he's like, this product is so bad. He's like, I can't even review it. Yeah. They've made claims about what it will do. It doesn't do most of what it says it'll do. I can't even review this thing. He's like, it's terrible. Worst product I've ever reviewed. So I guess my question, there's a famous talk. This is slightly off topic, but same concept. So Stop Drawing Dead Fish by Brett Victor. Go watch it. It's amazing. And his whole thing is use the medium to its full potential. So if I draw a picture of a fish on a paper, I don't have a fish. I have a two-dimensional representation of a fish. And depending on my drawing skill, I can make it, really photorealistic or not so much. And then if I put a fish on a TV, I can get video, right? I can either draw and animate, or I can take a video of a fish swimming, and I can see how a fish moves. But it's a dumb fish, right? It doesn't respond to anything. It's just that loop forever. And so on a computer, what you can do is now you can simulate. And he shows a fish that, when he puts a hook in the water, it swims over. Like we can do a simulation, like a video game. And we can not just see the motion, but we can see the behavior of something. And so that's my question, right, is what does this do for me? What new capability, if I'm going to buy another thing, I already have my smartphone. It's not bad, right? I'm pretty happy with it. The screen's a good size, good resolution. Like, what does a little pin that goes on my shirt, what does that do for me that my smartphone doesn't?
I think the concept is hands-free.
Okay, but what's the advantage there? Right? Because I can't see pictures on it. Now, it did one of the cool flashy features. It had a little pico projector for laser.
Yeah.
So if you wanted a screen, you could put your hand out in front of you and it would project onto your hand. And then you could do different hand gestures to like move it around and select things and like, kind of like the Apple, what's it called? The big headset they have, the ski goggles.
The
Vision
VR.
Pro. Yeah. So, but, a little different than that. So the thing is, the picture you're going to get projecting onto your hand is not flat and highly reflective like matte white.
Right.
So the picture's never going to be that good. I'm never going to watch a movie by holding my hand in front of me. It's only kind of okay for some basic UI stuff. So, like, again, what does this thing give me? Now, it'd be really cool if it had enough power in the laser projector to, like, do augmented reality. And, like, if I'm doing navigation, it's like while I'm walking in a city, for instance, it's projecting arrows in front of me on the ground. Oh, that'd be so cool,
that'd be
right?
badass, yeah.
But it doesn't do that. That's a much harder problem to
What
solve.
if they offer a white glove?
Then you got to do the Michael Jackson thing. I think all in all, like these products, first off, we are not their customers. And they're not marketing to us.
Yeah.
I think that the customers for them right now are the early adopters. And then as they develop this technology more, we're going to find more of a market. I think that these products have a good idea and they need to keep pushing with it. It's just the bad PR and the way they handle the bad PR has been an issue. Do you guys remember Google Glass?
Yep.
Yeah, very similar to that, where it was, this is a product that's in beta. It's not really releasable yet, but we want to put it in the hands of people so they can play with it and see what kind of cool things they come out with it.
Yeah.
The project itself shut down, didn't really get as much value as they wanted. And I think that we're also going to see that with these systems.
And there was also some unintended consequences,
a lot of unintended consequences.
To misquote a famous cartoon, wearing Google Glass. Note to self, do not pee.
Yeah.
Right? Like, it's not cool if you're in a bathroom and you pop out a camera or a phone. That is going to raise a few eyebrows. Most people are not going to be cool with that. So when you walk in wearing your Google Glass, which is a camera, people are not going to be cool with that, right? And so same thing with the Apple Vision Pro has cameras all over it.
Yeah.
So my smartphone, as much as I don't like the two cameras on it, well, technically it's a whole bunch of cameras on the back and one on the front, like I still can cover them up. When it's in my pocket, I know it can't get pictures of anything. Right, I can see where it's facing, but if you're wearing an Apple Vision Pro, there's some major privacy implications. It's recording everything around you.
Can't you just take it off before you go to the restroom?
Where are you going to put it? I think it's
drawer.
huge.
I was going to say.
Oh, I'm saying when you're out.
Oh, when you're out.
At home, yeah. I mean, at home, just don't take it in the bathroom easy, right?
Well,
but I'm talking about when you're out at a public
I'm pretty sure they
restroom.
give you like a
I wouldn't take
a
the
pouch
Apple
or
to,
something like that.
A public restroom. That would be weird.
Yeah.
So where are you going to leave it though, right?
And then people are
Don't
going to be
take
looking
it
at
out.
you. Yeah.
Or bring put it in a bag.
But their whole thing is
Yeah,
that
yeah,
they,
put it
because
in
what are
your
you going to
bag.
do when the battery dies?
Yeah, so their whole thing, right, is like they want you to take this out into the world. So you're probably going to have to use the restroom at some point. And so, yeah, now you have to carry a backpack all the time with this thing. Not exactly liberating,
When
is it?
When the battery dies, I mean, you're going to have to do that anyways. It's like a camera.
Yeah. So there's unintended consequences. And my thing, like your question, Joe, is like, well, what would it take? Well, what does this let me do? And is it significantly better than what I can do? I mean, hands-free, okay, it's kind of cool. But what does it do? Like, why would I pay hundreds or thousands of
what's
dollars?
the utility?
What
What's the
justifies
additional
that price?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think we'll take a break.
Sounds good. There we go.
All right, everybody. Welcome back. Elio,
So I want to finish up the topic that we talked about because we talked about a whole bunch of specifics.
is this
But
for
the-
recall?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, Recall and Humane and Rabit, the whole point of all that stuff that we put together is there has been a massive shift. The last 2 years or so, I would say there was this narrative, right? This marketing narrative that if you don't have AI in your product, your company's dead, right? AI is the future. You've got to have it. Right. And then recently, with Adobe, which was mentioned, right? They said, oh, we're going to, it wasn't even, hey, we're going to train on your stuff. It was just ambiguous, like, oh, they might train on my artwork. And that was enough to get people to start. I saw all kinds of posts on Hacker News and Reddit and all over the place.
Oh, yeah,
people
panicked.
Yeah, what are you switching to? I'm not using Adobe anymore. So they lost quite a few customers, probably never come back. And so it's been an amazing shift in 2 years from AI is the future. AI is amazing. AI, yay, you know, just cheerleading like crazy to AI. Oh, God, like I want nothing to do with that. And just a whiff of AI is enough to get people now to flee in droves. Not everyone, but certain people.
Yeah.
Is that because of the privacy? Or
Oh, there's so many issues. We might have to do a separate episode, but part of it, yes, part of it's privacy. Part of it is artists, right? Artists feel like they're being displaced, which is true and false. Yes.
The iPad. Talk about the iPad ad.
Oh, yeah. Didn't we cover that last time?
It's relevant here.
Yeah. So, yeah, for anyone who hasn't seen it, Apple, this goes down in history as like, I think one of the 2 or 3 worst ads ever in terms of having the opposite effect.
Yeah.
And like they issued, like this is so bad, they issued an apology in like less than 24 hours. So apparently this might have been a real press. It looked almost CG to me, but it might actually be real. So they rented this enormous hydraulic press, right? So anyone who's been on YouTube, you've probably seen the hydraulic press channel. The dude in, was it Norway, Sweden, crushes stuff. It's really
talk
cool.
about the commercial.
So someone thought, that's really cool. What if we took that concept and what if we put all kinds of art stuff in a huge hydraulic press? What if we put pianos and metronomes and paints and musical like everything we can think of that represents creativity, and then what if we crushed it all? And you see like paint cans popping and spraying, rainbows of paint everywhere, metronome, you could see that like fall apart, and just all this stuff, and they crush it all down. The press goes completely closed, and then when it opens, there's a little iPad in there representing, right? The idea was like, oh, look, we've put all the creativity, all the tools in one thing. That is not how it was received.
Well, especially coming off the heels of the SAG-AFTRA strike.
Yeah.
Okay, but I'm kind of confused. Why would that have a backlash?
So a lot of people feel that AI, generative AI specifically, the ability to, you know, just give me a picture of a, you know, girl riding a frog through a thunderstorm, so just literally anything you want to say, and it will give you a picture. Now, if you've actually tried this stuff, it's not quite that simple. You usually have to try a few times and refine your prompt, and then eventually you kind of get something okay-ish. But it doesn't matter because there's all these demos of that and Sora, which we covered on a previous episode, where you can get a minute of video, and the marketing is that you don't have to have any skill. You don't have to go get a 4-year art degree and learn how colors mix and learn how human musculature works so you can properly draw a smile on a face that's not creepy, that's realistic, right?
You don't have to hire artists. You don't have to hire writers. You don't have to hire these creatives that have still historically struggled to make a living simply because there's a whole meme online in those spaces that's basically like, oh, yeah, we'll pay you an exposure. Make this art for us for free, and we'll put it up, and then everybody will see that you made this art. And it's like, cool. I can't eat exposure. I can't buy bread with exposure.
The old cartoon of the skeleton laying there died of exposure.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, so that's the narrative among artists, and there are there's what's the name of the news site? I think. Was it DeviantArt?
Yeah.
Well, no, that's not the new one. They blocked it. And well, you're supposed to tag if it's AI generated, but there's a whole new site that is specifically to share stuff, and they have a total ban.
With that one,
I forget the name. Total ban on AI. It's just growing. It's up and coming. So like this is really the artistic community. Whether you're talking writers, whether you're talking illustrators, movie makers, anyone who's a creative, there is a huge kind of rift. Some are kind of embracing it and saying this has its use in limited capacities. It helps in certain ways, but other people are just like, oh, heck no. Like, we want nothing to do with any of this. And so there's a major shift, right? And this is something I think is really interesting, is just it's gone from like this is the future to like, and the Luddites, that was brought up before the pre-planning notes. Like, we are really seeing Luddites V2. And it's worth looking into the history of the Luddite movement, because a lot of the same exactly what they were saying back then, it applies, right?
Even with like the commercial specifically was a visual representation of what the artists were feeling, especially again coming off the heels of the SAG-AFTRA strike, where they're being crushed. Them as creators are metaphorically in that press and being put onto that iPad, and so coming off of all of that, people feel like this is just a big FU middle finger to all of the creatives that play instruments, that make art.
Yeah.
That's why there was so much.
I'm an artist on the weekends.
I've heard you play a little.
But I mean, I do it as a hobby. I mean, when I see that, I don't get offended. But is this kind of like the same thing as Devin, like taking over
Not
programmers?
Yeah, I'll go with Gavin. Not quite. I think there's parallels, but I think you're right. I don't think it's exactly the same. What would you say differentiates this from Devin and code generation?
I think the history between software developers and artists is very different. Artists really struggle to be seen and recognized for the work and the effort that they put in. There's a lot of people that'll look at a piece of art and wonder why it costs, $100. And it's like, because it took me hours to make this. And so that disconnect is something that is part of the baggage in the conversation when it comes to artists and creatives. And so when somebody says, oh, I can do it for free using these AI tools, and it's like, well, how am I going to eat? And the thing is, we need artists, we need writers, we need creatives, we need people that can do this. And I think that, especially at the higher levels of corporate culture, they think, oh, well, we can replace our artists or our writers with AI. Cool. Somebody who uses AI to write is a writer. They're doing all of the things a writer would need to do. They need to prompt it properly. They need to grab the information. They need to treat that as a first draft. They need to edit it. They need to make it content and something useful.
Yeah.
And so if you want to replace those people with just AI itself, you're going to get stuff that really, really sucks and doesn't make any sense and it's not usable. Then you're going to hire in a writer, or you're going to hire in somebody at half the wage in order to say, hey, here's something that we put together by pumping it into AI. Make this into something useful. And this is going to be a bit of a problem, especially down the line. And we already saw some conversations about this back in 2016, where it's like, what do you do when people can't work?
Yeah.
What do you do when there aren't jobs to do, especially some of the higher level jobs?
You have to.
And that's more real for the creatives. That's more real for the artists. It's more real for the writers. For the software developers, there's a lot that goes into software development and understanding and experience and know-how. And especially as technologies change, the AI can't keep up with that. Right. So software developers, they're always going to have a job. Like, yeah, you'll be able to automate some stuff, but that's always been the nature of software development. Before AI, people would write scripts. I mean, I remember when I was working in IT, like right out of college, there was a sign up on my boss's door that said, piss me off and I'll script your job.
That's kind of awesome.
Which is, but that's part of, the software development technology game.
And that's it. Like, I mean, right now, yes, software developers, we're job destroyers, right? We teach the computer to do what people used to do.
Yeah.
And in some ways, AI is just a continuation of that. I think what's not getting, there's finally several papers, at least two I've seen, two separate papers on AI as a bullshit generator. And there was a really good, was it Time magazine a while back, had a really good write-up on mediocrity in AI. And we're starting to see the leading edge of this discussion. I think it needs to be had much more openly and, just more, it needs to be on the top of everyone's mind. The reason AI can replace your job is because AI does good enough. We have been dumbing down just the quality of everything in society. A lot of the stuff that gets written, right? A lot of the stuff, you have Fiverr, you have Upwork, you have all these gig economy work things. Yeah. You never get high quality off there because you're always asking for, hey, I need this drawing for like $10.
Yeah, it's a race to the bottom.
Yeah, but as any actually skilled artist, even one fresh out of, art college, it's going to be like several $100s to get a student who just graduated to give you a good version of that. So when you're asking for $10, you're not going to get anything good. And so we've already kind of gotten used to pushing down the importance of art and settling for extreme mediocrity. And so that's the problem, is the pressure has been for lower and lower quality. And AI is good enough. If the quality metric is reads okay-ish, doesn't really make any sense, AI's there. So yeah, AI is and will destroy a lot of jobs, as long as we don't care about quality. Now, when you need high quality writing, no, AI is definitely not there, right? There's a lot of flaws, like you got to go redo a ton of stuff. But the problem is most of the jobs right now that let people put food on the table, they don't have the luxury of truly using the skills that they went to college for and really showing what they're capable of. They're being pushed to do more and more stuff at lower and lower quality for more and more hours. And so that's a separate issue, the societal issue, but it has opened the door to AI replacement.
Yep. I 100% agree with that.
And like my favorite quote, I forget which woman, what was her name? Really good quote going around on social media. She's like, what happened? She's like, why are we automating art and all the wonderful things? Automate doing the laundry and cooking the food.
Yeah,
Let me
I
do
remember
the
saying
art.
that. Yeah. Let me do the
I
hard.
agree
Let me
with
do the
that.
fun stuff.
Right? Like we've lost the plot. Like this has always been the goal of humanity is automate the crappy stuff so we can spend more time
Yeah.
hanging out with friends and our kids and just cooking amazing meals and doing just art. Like that was the point. And it's just insane that we're automating the best things and then still leaving the rest for manual labor.
The thing that I'm personally concerned about is the skill gap. So we're creating a wider and wider skill gap where we're making the easy stuff that people would become interns for or even juniors at in whatever field that they're in. And we're making that easier so that when you hop into the industry, you have to know so much. The example that I always point to is software developers. Like coming out of college, back in like early 2000s, for example, in order to be a web developer, you need to know HTML, CSS, and JavaScript.
Yeah.
Now you need to know HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, but not just JavaScript. You need to know React or you need to know Angular, and not just CSS, but you need to know Tailwind CSS or whatever other CSS framework.
Yeah.
But not just JavaScript. You need to know Node. You need to know package management. You need to know Git. You need to know so many things just to start.
Yeah.
And there is no way that people graduating college can catch up to that unless they really go the no sleep life and learn all this stuff on their own, which school doesn't teach them.
We had the luxury of when I started doing HTML, like web development, it was HTML.
Yeah.
There was no CSS.
You get front page, Microsoft front page, and you start making it all up, or Dreamweaver.
And it was, what, a third as many tags. There have been a whole bunch of tags added. I just learned about the template tag.
Added a lot. Yeah.
So it was very small. So I literally grew up with the web as I got into it and started learning server-side includes and all the old-timey CGI bin, all the early technologies. Then they're like, oh, we should be able to make it look good. And then ironically, there was that competition between JSSS, JavaScript style sheets, and CSS or cascading style sheets. And looking back, like we probably should have just gone with JSSS because then you would have only needed 2 languages.
Right.
Because now every site needs JavaScript anyway. And it's like, but now, you need minimum 3 plus all the frameworks plus deployment, everything you were saying. But the flip side to that, because I've been doing a bit of teaching, both formally and informally, it's so much easier. Like when I started, there was almost nothing. Like you really had to scrounge.
There's more resources.
And now, do you want to do interactive? There's games. Like there's literally like Flexbox Froggy. Yep. Like you can play games to learn how certain aspects of CSS work. And it's awesome. It actually is. I strongly recommend if you're struggling with CSS Grid or Flexbox or any of these things, those games are amazing. They really get you to understand it. So there's videos, there's games, there's simulations, there's, just a billion references written a ton of different ways. There's a ton of it's free. There's even other stuff if you want to pay. I found another service that looked pretty good, and you can pay for it, get like 6,000 templates and all this to really try your hand. So I don't know. I don't know where the balance is. Yes, there's much more to learn, but it's also way easier to learn it. And that is the one thing I will say. Thank you again, Gavin, for pulling me into doing that demo at the beginning of the year for CactusCon. Because I had been just the grumpy old man, just like, oh, AI is crap. And then I had to actually hop in and do some Python and learn some AI stuff. And I'm like, these are definitely a long way from perfect. But I find myself roughly on an average day, let me average it out, because not every day, but I will use language models to help speed up my searches, right?
Yes.
How do I do this? And it's usually wrong, but it's usually close enough where then I know exactly what I'm searching for in 10 seconds, and then I can pop that into DuckDuckGo and start looking around and find the detail that I need. And it saves me hours of time, and I find myself doing that at least two to 10 times a day, depending on which day.
Yeah, I'm on a project right now, and I've been trying to create a brute forcer for an encryption algorithm. But in order to make it run fast enough, it either has to be in C or Java. But I need to understand how they implemented it in their application, and the application uses .NET and Java, so it needed to be in Java. So I had to ask ChatGPT, hey, write me in Java this encryption algorithm that does these things. And now that I have encryption, let me do decryption. Let me make sure that these two work, because you always want to verify. You can get things wrong sometimes. Cool. Now turn this into a brute forcer so I can brute force all of the key space. And now parallelize that so that I can run it on a system so it's not running one instance at a time. It's running like 100 instances or 1,000 instances at a time to speed it up. I was trying to get it to write me CUDA, but it even admits like CUDA is difficult. lines. And I'm like, yeah, I'm not going to debug any of the stuff that you just wrote. So let's go back to Java.
Yeah, there is some research on high level straight to CUDA and like high multi-thousand core execution someday.
Yeah, that would be cool.
And the last thing I guess we'll finish up with here is right now you cannot have it give you code. I mean, you can, but every bit of code I've gotten from even the GPT-4o model has either just not worked or had subtle errors that will bite you very badly in the future.
It's the subtle errors that'll bite you. Typos and things like that.
I have seen some really interesting work, though, on directly generating, instead of a language model, a programming language model. And they were generating Lisp, and there's reasons why Lisp is ideal, because you're looking right at the AST, essentially. So, like, the code doesn't have to be transformed from how you wrote it into an abstract syntax tree. It already has that form. And so really interesting stuff, and just literally people drawing a picture, and this model would then kind of partly evolutionarily and partly using language models would figure out how to write a program that would draw the picture that you drew, only a perfect version of it instead of like the hand-drawn.
Right.
It's very cool. And there's some other stuff like Alloy and Synquid. There's some really interesting technologies. I really do think maybe in 20 years, maybe less, we'll see. If we take the right technologies and put them together, I really do think a normal person, instead of wasting all this brain space that I've wasted on learning how to code, like a normal person, even if they're not good at explaining all of the nuance of a problem, which is the main part of programming, can sit down with a computer in the next 20 years and say, write me a program that does this. And it won't be enough, right? And the computer will say, well, what if this happens? What do you want me to do? Well, okay, then do this. Well, what if this happens? So it won't be just write me a program, right? You'll sit down and you'll do this question and answer, and it might take hours or even a few days. But I think in 20 years, it will be able to actually kind of prod you enough and build out a complete model integrated with the model checker, integrated with something like Alloy finding counterexamples, and you'll be able to get really high quality code without ever having to learn to program.
I think you're right. I think that it will come out to that at some point. I think we need to move away from large language models to make that happen. I think we need something that is a little bit more formalized. Again, Lisp might be a good idea, honestly, as opposed to something like object-oriented programming. That way you build consistent functions.
Lisp, cat, or kitten. There's a thing called concatenative functional that's really interesting.
Just any functional language, honestly. Well, it could be Haskell.
The way you can move concatenative around, it's in point-free notation, so you can literally just take chunks of code and reorder them, and you don't have to worry about mismatches between arguments. It's really, really interesting. So, and that's based on brand new research that, like, literally the early 2000s is when the mathematical foundations of concatenative functional programming were really, I won't say, I guess formalized. I was going to say finalized, but they're still so much more formalized.
I want to see AI create a compilable language. So imagine the next iteration of Rust basically being optimized via AI machine learning. There's been a lot of great research in terms of AI, more traditional machine learning, optimizing certain things, being used to measure certain features and identify the most optimal path between those features. Because you look at something like, for instance, the traveling salesman problem, right? Like we've tried to solve that problem. We have an algorithm. The algorithm's not great, but we haven't found a better algorithm, and we can use AI and machine learning and some of these mathematical models in order to build better algorithms. And there are people who are working in this kind of area. So imagine that instead of focusing on mathematical models in order to build essentially better programming languages.
Yeah, I think that's what we've forgotten is the key thing here is finding patterns in a huge high dimensional data sets. And that is what, like, that's the huge value that AI, not just like language models, they talk like a person. Everyone loves language models.
There's a lot of benefits to language models. Yeah,
there are. But
language models aren't all there is to AI.
Thousands of other machine learning algorithms that a lot of them don't have hallucination issues, right? They're much more deterministic in what they can do. Yeah. And there's been, like, at some episode, we'll have to do positive stuff because we tend to cover, some of the, where does this go wrong? But there's been some really interesting research mapping, like, I want this effect in the human body. What protein gives me that?
Right.
For drug discovery. And there are some really compelling use cases that it's not all gloom and doom. There are actually some upsides here. The main problem, I think, is just the marketers have gotten a hold of it and said, this will cure everything.
Well, and it's the news cycle. That's why everybody associates AI with large language models. And it's like, no, there's more to it. Like, traditional machine learning never went away.
Yeah.
It's still being used. It's just not, on the front page of the newspaper anymore.
It's, to finish, it's snake oil. This is modern snake oil. I did a post on LinkedIn, And so the quick background, the 1-minute version of snake oil is, when the Chinese immigrants were building the railroads, which is just backbreaking labor, right? Really hard labor. It's really hard on your joints. And so they had Chinese water snake oil, which is like 20% ECA. It's high in omega-6 fatty acids. And so, yeah, it's actually really good for your joints. Anything that benefits from really high dose omega-6 acids, like it's perfect for that. And then other people are like, oh, and they started getting rattlesnake oil, which is only about 6%. So it doesn't really work. And then some unscrupulous people were selling just vegetable oil. And so the irony is like Chinese water snake oil is a valid treatment that is recognized by the medical community, although uncommon in the US. And the marketing, the selling other substitutes and passing them off as the original was the problem. And I think machine learning has the same issue, right?
Yeah, we're definitely going to see that. But we see that with every new technology. We saw it with cloud too.
Oh, totally.
I'm curious, how do you how do you extract oil from a snake? Like,
I'm guessing destructively. I'm guessing it's like pressing a duck. I'm guessing there's not a lot of snake left over afterwards.
Wow. I was thinking like olive oil.
They're
like
cool looking snakes.
You press the olives. It's like you just press the snake. It's like,
yeah, they're really interesting looking snakes, kind of like this like orangey gray color. I actually had a picture of the Chinese water snake, and I'm like, that's the little guy, huh? So, but anyway.
I'm going to crush you.
So we should stop it there. We'll have to get to the rest of the topics. We have a whole topic list when we were planning the show. We have stuff for the next 5 years now.
We got a lot of stuff to talk about for sure. No, but it's good. It's good that we offer ourselves the opportunity to kind of go on some of these tangents, because then we can bring our own experiences into the mix and talk about what we see and what we think is possible. I had a conversation with somebody on Twitter earlier today, and they kind of went in a direction where I understand how they got there.
Okay.
I understand what they were trying to say. There's some faults in their assumptions, but I understand how they got there. And I think it's important for us to have those conversations to, bring these ideas into the zeitgeist and then explain, okay, here's why these ideas are good, here's why these ideas are bad, or here's where we're seeing the trajectory and why we're seeing it moving in this direction and not quite in that direction. Like I said, I think large language models are getting pretty close to the peak of what they can do. We're going to see some innovations and changes in their architecture for sure, right? We've had large language models for a long time, but when Transformers came out in 2016, OpenAI was building these GPT models, right? We had GPT-2, GPT-3, and then GPT 3.5, which is ChatGPT, like really blew up. GPT-4, GPT-4o, all the open source or, privately runnable models. They're not technically open source, but that was a topic in a previous video. Yeah. I think we're going to move away from large language models. You'll have things like mixture of experts, mixture of agents. Sure, that's going to help improve their lifespan a little bit longer than they otherwise would. But I think that we're going to go back to a little bit more of a more traditional machine learning perspective and understand like, hey, you know what? It's not all language. Let's do mathematics. Let's see what we can do with that.
I'm going to make myself look stupid, but I will say my prediction, and this could take a few decades, my prediction is that if we're going to get anywhere near vaguely in the neighborhood of AGI or just something a lot more useful, it's going to be an ensemble model. You're going to have one or more layers
100%.
And kind of a dispatcher, and then a whole bunch of might be an LLM over here, might be a symbolic model over there, right? A whole bunch of different stuff, and it will know how to route that to combine, because that's what we see mirroring the structure of the human brain, right? You have speech centers, you have language centers, you have motor centers, and then it all kind of gets coordinated, and you get a working person.
And that's kind of how the mixture of agents and mixture of mixture of agents, I'm like, meh on, but mixture of experts for sure, where there are specialized pockets. So you take a complex problem, you split it up into smaller pieces, and then you have something work on that smaller piece, and then you bring it all back together to form the
same idea, but a lot more of them with a lot more diversity in the types of models.
Exactly.
So we'll see.
So that'll be fun.
Stick with us for the next 20 years. We'll find out if I'm wrong or not.
Yeah. All right. Awesome. Well, I guess I'll sign us off. This was the Ethical Algorithm Podcast. Thanks for listening. You have your host, Joe, myself, Gavin, and Elio.
Until next time.
Until next time.